Okay, thank you, Lauren. For everyone who wants to receive materials from me should be receiving materials from me. If you're not and you want them, please send me an email so I can get you on the list. And if you're getting too much and you don't want to be on the list, just send me an email and I'll take you off of there. Okay, threats to the slave masters continued mounting after the Civil War. The scramble for Africa heated up, leading to the First World War. War spending led to an economic boom, ushering in the Roaring '20s. But this led to risky speculation by investors who embrace concepts of let the market rule. And this led to a financial collapse. We will experience this again in 2008. The Great Depression fueled anger in those at the bottom of the economic strata. Populist socialism gained favor. The titans of business and industry shuddered at thoughts of socialism and communism. Then came the New Deal, another worldwide war, and government control of manufacturing. For this first video, you may want to turn your volume up because the sound may be a little low. Only for this one. I have 8 different ones to show today. So by the end of the 19th century, European powers competed for control of Africa. Industrialization demanded a steady flow of resources. Africa was ripe for the picking. Fighting for control of African resources became known as the Scramble for Africa.
Africa, the dark continent of the early explorers, became the stage for the final act in the story of Queen Victoria's empire. In the footsteps of missionaries like David Livingstone, the powers of Europe conducted a brutal race for colonies, a race that would become known as the Scramble for Africa. In Britain, this last burst of expansion was inspired by 2 men whose stories would bring the British people to a climax of imperialistic fervor. The first, General Charles Gordon. Sent on a diplomatic mission to a poor Arab country, he launched a personal crusade to free an oppressed people. His defiant stand would draw his queen and her empire into a holy war and lead them on a romantic but violent quest to impose a new world order. The second, Cecil John Rhodes, started out as a simple cotton farmer, and he became the greatest empire builder of his generation. To fund his dreams of conquest, he embarked on a ruthless pursuit of diamonds, gold, and power that made him the most formidable and the most hated man in Africa. Between them, Cecil Rhodes and Charles Gordon exemplified the virtues and the vices of their age. They would lead the British to new heights of glory, and they would expose the dark underside of Victoria's empire.
Colonization of the Americas provided the template for colonizing Africa. Despite conferences for establishing rules in claiming African colonies, friction continued building between the European powers, eventually erupting into World War I. This was mass butchery. This video is in French, but it needs no interpretation.
Puis la ferme qui est juste derrière. Ensuite, le centre terrien viendra nous relever en fin de journée. Et on pourra retourner se reposer à l'arrière. On va être épaulé par les Écossais sur notre gauche. Vous les reconnaîtrez à leur calot noir. Ne vous occupez pas d'eux. Restez attentifs à ce que moi je vous dirai. Je suis comme vous. Moi aussi je veux rentrer chez moi. Alors faites ce que vous avez à faire. Et dans une semaine, on passera tous Noël à la maison. Voilà. Advienne ce que devra. Baïonnette au canon! Approvisionner! Chargez!
World War I was a bloodbath. And at the end of World War I, Europeans were exhausted. The Russians threw out their government and tried a new government, so-called communism, drawn from the communist, the common people who subsisted on common lands. Please recall that we addressed the communist when we discussed the Enclosure Acts and the Highland clearances in Britain. This was a conflict between aristocrats and common people. At the end of World War I, Russia adopted a communist government. Please note that Lenin walked away from strict communism in 1921 with the new economic policy that included capitalism. Meanwhile, England, France, and Germany teetered on the edge of communism at the end of the war, as the common people wanted something other than governments that led them into war.
Hi, I'm Jesse Alexander, and welcome to The Great War. British society emerged from the First World War profoundly changed, and this was especially true of the working class. The requirements of the wartime economy meant that miners, shipbuilders, and railwaymen had more responsibility and influence than ever before. Unions were able to improve their positions during the war, but once the Russian Revolution broke out and the war ended, government and the labor force were once again at odds. The workers wanted to keep what they had gained, and government and owners were afraid of a Bolshevik-style revolution in the tense post-war UK. In this episode, we'll take a look at the situation of British labour, its connections to international socialism, and its bitter clashes with the state. And it all happened 100 years ago. Prior to the First World War, the Labour Party acted as the vehicle for the interests of the political left and urban workers. But unlike other political parties, Labour consisted of a network of affiliated bodies, like trade unions and intellectual societies. Within the Labour network, there were groups like the Fabian Society and the Independent Labour Party, both of which promoted socialist ideology. Even though Labour included socialist thinkers and leaders, it generally pushed for reform rather than revolution. They wanted improvements to workers' lives to come from Parliament and not from the overthrow of the system. That's why Labour refused to affiliate itself with more radical groups like the Communist Party of Great Britain.
And so you can see that the tensions were mounting against the elites, the slave masters. This was building more and more power. Then came the Great Depression, further highlighting the injustice of great wealth in the face of great poverty. The system of capitalism that emerged from the triangle trade, which we discussed in the African slave trade, followed by the Atlantic slave trade, was open to speculation. This meant gambling, which we will see once again in 2008. When the system did not work as expected and as advertised, A panic set in. Investors sold off their investments, and there was a run on the banks as inflation exploded. It was catastrophic. Fear of survival was palpable.
These were our parents and grandparents, our own aunts and uncles. In their world, the America of the 1930s, something went desperately wrong. Like a bad dream, a punishment, or a plague.
I felt that we weren't going to make it. Certainly that I wasn't going to make it. I was convinced that I was going to die one night.
They had nowhere to turn but to their families, their friends, and the kindness of strangers. They had no idea when it would end, how it would end, or even if it would end.
We eat a lot of beans now. A lot of people ate a lot of beans in the Depression.
They saw grinding poverty and fabulous wealth side by side. Great armies of migrants on the move with nowhere to go.
We were different. We were poor. We were dependent on people for help. And a lot of the people in the businesses called us filthy scum, dirty, rotten, stinking Okies, all that.
Dirt farmers, maids, and titans of industry. In America's fields and factories, they fought terrible battles against each other. And in their fury, they must have asked themselves if democracy itself could survive.
I don't think it. I know damn well there would have been a revolution in America if Roosevelt had not got elected. And I'd have been damn part of that revolution.
They chose a rich man, a landed aristocrat disabled by polio, to help them redeem America.
And you felt that this guy came, he was going to save the people. And a tremendous feeling for him. Holy elderly people, they could kiss his toenails. That's how much they loved this guy.
He saved capitalism. Whether this is a good thing or not, I'm not about to betray my sentiments, but he saved it.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless.
Fear itself. Somehow, in the hardest of hard times, with America slipping away, our parents and grandparents found the courage to fight their way out. They clung to the hope that they could save America. That hope drove them to acts of heroism, drove them to take hold of their own destiny, to come together and make their nation work for them. Nothing turned out quite the way they planned. What began in the Roaring '20s ended when war exploded in the '40s. They may have done an imperfect job. Some lost their nerve, and some gave their lives. But by the time the Great Depression was over, they had done better than simply save America. They had made a new America. These are their stories.
As the economy settled and began recovering, new rules. Remember, the slave masters want no rules, which is another way of saying free market. These new rules included separation between investment and commercial banking. Reversing these rules during the Clinton administration contributed significantly to 2008. The new banking rules were too late, however, as the damage resulting from the crash of 1929 was already done, creating a global economic crisis, giving birth to Hitler and the Nazis. The similarities with 2008 are painfully obvious. Government programs for employment and economic stimulation provided some relief for those still recovering from the Great Depression. As tensions in Europe mounted and Japanese aggression spread across Manchuria, FDR began preparing for war. He gathered corporate executives, academics, and government officials to analyze the future and prepare for war. One of the things they found is that America was vulnerable to the inaccessibility of rubber. Rubber was essential for the American military, planes, trucks, tanks. Without rubber, the American military was neutered.
In New York City, one of nature's wonders is about to be tamed. Inventor Charles Goodyear. Determined, obsessed, and broke. From a tenement kitchen, he'll kickstart a transport revolution. Native Americans in the Amazon have used it for centuries, extracting a white sap from trees. They call it caoutchouc. Rubber.
Rubber is one of the most underappreciated miracles of nature.
It's up there with coal and steel and bronze. It's become this kind of secret juice that's allowed us to expand beyond our limits.
In its raw state, rubber isn't very useful. It melts when hot, cracks when cold. Goodyear tries to change its chemical structure to make it more resilient and more useful.
Goodyear's one of those interesting kind of eccentrics in America that's absolutely dogged by a single idea.
For 5 years, nothing. His debts consign him to jail. His family relies on handouts. But Goodyear believes he's divinely inspired.
There's no object so desirable, so important, and so necessary to the human race as making rubber available for man's use.
Then, a breakthrough. He adds sulfur. The result? A material tough like leather, but flexible. He calls the process vulcanization, after the Roman god of fire.
He lost his fortune several times, went bankrupt a number of times, but never gave up on the idea, this is something that will change the world, and he was absolutely right.
Almost every machine in the Industrial Revolution relies on rubber fittings and seals to withstand the pressure of the steam. Hundreds of parts in a Model T Ford are made from rubber, freeing mankind to travel further and faster than ever before. Demand for rubber skyrockets. 6,000 miles from Goodyear's tenement, Africa, one of the world's great sources of natural resources. The Congo, 900,000 square miles. Over 2 billion rubber plants. Under brutal colonial rule. The heart of darkness.
And so as they assess what the implications will be without having access to rubber, they realize that they have to do something. And so in a very short period of time, the Roosevelt administration, with industry, academics, and government officials, miraculously comes up with synthetic rubber. Had it not been for that, America would not have been able to provide the manufacturing that won the war. And as America prepared for war, Americans adopted the idea that we are all in this together.
An army of 150,000 men, women, and children invaded an American city. Whites, Negroes, Indians, Creoles, Cajuns. They came from every corner of the land, their roots in every curve of the globe. Moscow, Indiana, Warsaw, North Dakota, Hamburg, California, Milan, Missouri, Baghdad, Kentucky. Some came out of patriotism, some out of grim necessity, some for a richer life. All came to do a war job. This could be any one of 100 great American war centers. It happens to be Mobile, Alabama. But the story is the same in every war town in America.
The chronic unemployment that had eaten at Mobile and every other American town for more than a decade during the Depression was over. Idle factories were back in business. Mass production was an American invention, but now it reached levels its inventors could never have imagined. Nearly all manufacturing was converted to the war effort. In 1941, more than 3 million cars had been manufactured in the United States. Only 139 more were made during the entire war. Instead, Chrysler made fuselages. General Motors made airplane engines, guns, trucks, and tanks. And at its vast Willow Run plant in Ypsilanti, Michigan, 67 acres of assembly lines under a single roof that one observer called the Grand Canyon of the mechanized world. The Ford Motor Company performed something like a miracle, 24 hours a day. The average Ford car had some 15,000 parts. The B-24 Liberator long-range bomber had 1,550,000 parts. One came off the line at Willow Run every 63 minutes. If the American military wasn't yet quite equal to the Germans or the Japanese, American workers would soon be able to build ships and planes faster than the enemy could sink them or shoot them down. By the end of the war, more than 1/2 of all the industrial production in the world would take place in the United States. Mobile was among the fastest growing of all American war towns. Even before the war began, powerful Democratic Congressman Frank Boykin landed his city a $26 million defense contract that transformed the municipal airport into Brookley Field, a major Army Air Force supply depot and bomber modification center that provided 17,000 civilian jobs. In 1940, Gulf Shipbuilding had had 240 employees. By 1943, it had 11,600. In the same period, Alabama Dry Dock went from 1,000 workers to almost 30,000. They included Hank Williams, the future country music star, and the parents of future home run hitter Hank Aaron.
It was 7 days a week. And during the war, when it was so strong, it was 12-hour days, 5 days a week, 10 hours on Saturday, 8 hours on Sunday. You felt like you had a week off. There was such an influx of people that you got on each other's nerves. And there wasn't enough watering holes to entertain everybody. So they get out and have fights and drink and all that kind of stuff.
African Americans streamed into Mobile from all over the South in search of defense work and a fresh start. They found both. But they also found the same kind of discrimination they had known at home.
Mobile was a pretty fair-minded city. And before this time, whites and blacks got along pretty good as long as you had the status quo. But when blacks began to get homes, to buy homes and to ride in big cars, it turned some people off. The policeman would stop you and give you a ticket. My cousin got a ticket for driving 16 miles an hour in a 15-mile zone.
150,000 people, 10 full military divisions, the civilian equivalent of Rommel's entire African army, bivouacked without warning in the narrow confines of one peaceful southern city. Less than 3 years ago, you might have walked blocks in Mobile without encountering a person. Today, you stop to scratch your head and a line forms behind you. No wonder there's such a chaos and congestion of traffic.
Mobile became so crowded in 6 months that people were living in vacant lots. They put up tents in vacant lots. People went into the boarding houses, and one room would hold as many as 4 men.
Every available room was canvassed, utilized.
They would sleep for so many hours, get up and leave the bed, go to work, and another man would take the bed.
This was a neighborhood grocery store. These girls, welders, checkers, and machinists.
Emma Bell Petcher was from the tiny town of Millry, Alabama. Most of her girlfriends had taken secretarial jobs once they'd gotten out of high school. But Emma Bell, like her father, loved to take things apart.
I always fixed my own appliances at home growing up. The washing machine got a nail in the pump. I took the pump apart and took the nail out of the housing of the pump. And, you know, I didn't have the patience to call in a repairman who would be 3 days later and he wouldn't tell you morning or evening. So I'd empty the washing machine, turn it upside down, take the screwdrivers, and because I knew how to do all this stuff. So I packed my little cardboard suitcase and got on the bus and went to Mobile. So they put me in a school to learn airplane accessories. That was starters, generators, alternators, and some other thing. So we did those parts, just those little instruments over and over and over and over until graduation. We had to almost put them together blindfold.
Petcher breezed through all her tests and got a job working on airplanes. By 1943, 6 million women had entered the workforce, and nearly half of them were working in defense plants. Life magazine paid tribute to the mythical Rosie the Riveter as neither drudge nor slave, but the heroine of a new order. In Mobile, 2,500 women worked at Alabama Dry Dock, 1,200 at Gulf Shipbuilding, and 750 at Brooklyn Field, where Emma Bell Petcher worked her way up to inspector, responsible for quality control.
You would be assigned X number of planes to be responsible for. I was to inspect the torque and the screws in the wings and go into the gas tanks and crawl up in the wings with flashlights. Well, I was so conscientious, I just didn't make the mistakes.
I worked at the government nursery school, which was downtown in Christchurch Rectory. And we had the children of the women that worked in the shipyards. Rosie the Riveter would come bring her child in all of her headgear and her togs that she did her riveting in and drop her precious little baby off and go down and work all day and come back at 5 o'clock and pick the child up.
So many children flooded into Mobile that its overrun schools were pronounced the worst in the nation by the U.S. Office of Education. Some native citizens of Mobile were openly scornful of the newcomers. A school teacher called them the lowest type of poor whites, these workers flocking in from the backwoods. They prefer to live in shacks and go barefoot. They let their kids run wild on the streets. I only hope we can get rid of them after the war.
No one did it verbally or to you, but the air of the old aristocratic Mobile people were really, you know, had to put up with a lot.
Well, in Mobile, the people that came here to work in the shipyards came from the small towns. So we considered them rednecks. And they really weren't. They were very fine Americans, but they were more of our farming type of Southerner. But they adjusted quickly.
But, you know, everybody was thrown into it together, whether they liked it or not. We were all together.
And the story of Mobile is the story of every American war town.
It's really remarkable when you consider that half of the world's manufacturing was produced in America. It's a remarkable time, and it's a period where Americans were very united. Yes, there were, you know, contentions. It doesn't mean it was, you know, all brotherly love, but you can characterize that time as a united America. And America rallied to FDR, electing him 4 times to office. America was the manufacturing arm of the war effort, defeating Nazi Germany and Japan. Manufacturing, however, was controlled by government. This became a further threat to the slave masters. Fearing government competition, American manufacturers began a public relations campaign for capitalism. They did so using the communication manipulation techniques of Edward Bernays, who Terry will talk about at length beginning next week.
Next guest is a truly fascinating gentleman. He happens to be 93 years old, and he is the father of public relations. In the course of his 70-year career, some of his clients have been Presidents Wilson, Hoover, Coolidge, and Eisenhower, Thomas Edison, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Enrico Caruso. It's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Edward Bernays. Hi, Doctor. Good to see you. Come on up over here. There you go. Have a seat right here. Thank you very much for being here. I mentioned to the people how old you were. I hope you don't mind me telling them that. And what kind of a doctor are you? What is your...
Let me say, first of all, that everybody has 5 ages, and they don't match. I happen to be 93 chronologically.
Right.
But I'm 61 physiologically. Mentally, I don't know, I suppose I'm 45. And societally, how I adjust to other people. I wouldn't quiver if I saw poor Mr. Reagan. I'd say, "Hi, Reagan." And emotionally, I won't tell that to anybody.
So now you won't tell your emotional age to anybody?
No. Will you tell yours?
Well, based on your statistics, I've passed on weeks ago.
I'll accept that.
It was a lovely service, and I'm sorry you couldn't be there, but... All right, now, Doctor, tell me again what the doctor is. What are we dealing with?
Well,
You're the father of public relations.
What we're dealing with, really, is the concept that people will believe me more if you call me doctor.
Oh, I see.
People will believe me more if you call me doctor. And so he is the person who introduces us to public relations, which is the spin that we've come to know. There are 2 important components essential for Bernays techniques. One is measuring the inner thoughts and feelings of people by way of statistical analysis and focus groups. The second is devising messages based upon those findings to gain support while disguising the true agenda. An example of having an agenda and disguising it. Let's say that the agenda is to end American democracy. You promote candidates, the wealthy will find candidates, promote candidates who are privately in support of that agenda. But those candidates campaign on themes such as anti-abortion, gun freedom, and gay marriage. So it's the Trojan horse. Put them out with this agenda while the private agenda is taking place. These ideas can be found in the Trump campaign.
Until recently, Donald Trump was known more as a businessman than a politician. In the book Propaganda, published in 1928, Edward Bernays said politics was the first big business in America. Business has learned everything that politics has had to teach, but politics has failed to learn very much from business methods of mass distribution of ideas and products. However, now in 2016, I believe Donald Trump has learnt these lessons from his time as a businessman, and they have helped him become the next president of the United States of America. Bernays recognised that it is important to appeal to the wants of the consumer as opposed to merely their needs. In business, this meant that instead of a customer being told how useful a particular product is, the product is presented as fulfilling their unconscious desires. Edward Bernays thought that the best way to communicate this was through newspapers instead of traditional advertising, as people consider news articles to be fundamentally more trustworthy than adverts. He believed that news could and should be created in order to present the public with a version of events that would speak to their desires and guide their choices. Bernays believed that the public relations man is a creator of circumstance. Donald Trump has used Twitter as a medium to achieve a similar reaction from some voters. He uses his Twitter account with skill and is more prolific than most other presidential candidates, overtaking his rival Hillary Clinton for followers in late 2015. He now has over 15 million of them, compared to Clinton's 11 million. The result has allowed him to get his message out there without spending nearly as much money as his opponent, as different media sources such as TV, radio and other social media platforms all do it for him. One tweet he sent on the 8th of November 2016 Today We Make America Great Again, garnered over 350,000 retweets and well over 500,000 likes. Many politicians.
Okay, well, I think you get the point there. Let me take this here and slideshow from the current slide. Okay, so what we have is the war is taking place. World War I, followed by the Great Depression. We come out of the Great Depression with the New Deal. Americans are united together as we fight a second war. The slave masters are the people from the Civil War who lost power, but were able to stick around to fight another day, facing an uphill fight. But they are not about to give it up. They are about to wage a massive effort to drive a wedge between Americans. Their task will be to separate Americans from America. And they use the tools of Edward Bernays and the skills of very talented, smart people in law, political science, psychology, mass communications, to put together strategies, long-term strategies, to continue to fight, driving wedges between Americans, because remember, their objective is to end democracy. They do not like democracy. They want to be that they are in control and they don't have to answer to anyone. Okay, with that, George, we can, I'm sorry, Lauren, we can open up for discussions.
Okay, and George is here as well, so we can let him jump in as well. Anyone that has any questions, comments, or whatever, you can use the raise the hand function, which is probably found down in your reactions down at the bottom of your screen. Or conversely, you can throw something into chat. I see a lot of recurring themes in your presentation, Sal, with the wealth, greed, and power basis for people's thinking. Madeline is got something. Go ahead.
Yes. One thing that really strikes me about this presentation is how during World War II, we had a whole system of subsidized daycare for families that then went away, whereas the French turned that into several generations now. Virtually every child in France starts preschool by 3. If they can't afford it, the government pays for it. They're on like 3 or 4 generations now that have had this. And we took ours back away. And I think that's just another part of this, because clearly women were showed to be extremely capable, and yet they were told to go home and be housewives, as they were called when I was a kid. And, you know, those of us who grew up in the 50s, you know, we saw this firsthand. And I know my own mom, I think she would have been a much happier person if she'd had a job. She was very smart. She was that woman that when you went to a party, she was over talking to the men about economics and politics and business, while the other women were talking about recipes and stuff. And it just kills me that we deep-sixed a system that was already in place. And I think that those women revolutionized the workplace, and yet we're told to go home and shut up. And that's just another aspect of this.
Yeah, no, I think what it's to highlight is that World War II was a desperate effort, that if Hitler won, everybody gets wiped out. So now when the people who are at the top of the strata are fearful, then they are, we're all in this together. When they win the war, we're not all in this
together anymore.
Right? And, and it's and the cycle that we keep going through these cycles. I mentioned many times, we're going to see this again in 2008. We're going to see that because all of these things that led to the drama of the mid 20th century took place again at the beginning of the 21st century. And so we're going through this all over again. The argument today, where you have people now want to introduce a new tax arrangement so that we only pay sales tax, no income tax, and to let the states regulate that. This is to bring us back to the Articles of Confederation. So it's important to recognize these, what we're seeing today is not new. It is a repeat of an effort that has been underway from the very beginning.
Over and over. The other thing,
we need to know what the fight is that we're in if we're going to win.
Yeah. Also, this is kind of funny, but I have a relative, he's dead now, named Roe Alderson, who was called the father of marketing. And he was my grandmother's first cousin, and he taught at Wharton for many years. And I'm wondering if he and Bernays knew each other, because one was PR and one was marketing. But I found it fascinating when I discovered that he was my relative. I thought, oh, this can't be, but he is, and he was my grandmother's first cousin, which is kind of fascinating to me. But anyway, I just wanted to comment about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Madeline. Thank you.
Maxine.
You have to unmute. There we go.
I wanted to follow what Madeline was saying and ask you a question. So what was it in the French system versus our system that allowed them to continue with that and us not to? What was the difference?
Yeah, I think it's the best reference I have for that is Tony Jutt's The Post-War book that he wrote. He's a professor from NYU, and he writes about the post-war and the difference between things that happen in America and things that happen in Europe. And remember, the bulk of the fighting is in Europe. So Europe is in complete rubble. And he talks about how they come out of that war, and really the communists should have been in the poise to take power, because, you know, at the end of World War I, part of the fight was, oh, we're fearing the communists and the Bolsheviks, and they fight a war, and now these guys have won, so the Bolsheviks should be taking power. But the Bolsheviks don't take power. Europe says, you know what? We don't want to hear about ideology. We are living in rubble, and we want to rebuild it. And so there's a whole political force that takes shape in Europe, which is saying, don't give me ideology. We need practical solutions to real problems. We're starving, we're wounded, we're in trouble. And so what emerges is social democracy, which is, you know, a kind of a version of socialism, communism mixed with capitalism. So it's a very practical approach. And so when America is kind of insulated from that, and the people who do start to regain power are those who have an ideology. And that ideology is the monarchy, the oligarchy. We should have the power. And there, I would say to read Democracy in Chains and the works of James Buchanan, because he becomes their intellectual guru. In the Mount Pelerin Society that gives us Milton Friedman and others. So what is it that is at the heart of Buchanan. Buchanan wins a Pulitzer Prize for saying that you must put democracy in chains for a strong economy. Because if you don't put democracy in chains, then the population will elect people who are going to do things for them.
Spend the money.
Have that. If you're going to have strong economy, the only people who should have the power of democracy are those who own land and have power. And it must, and if the government wants to do anything, it should only be able to do it if those of power unanimously agree that any person of power would be able to veto any government action. So that's what emerges in America. While in Europe, we're changing. We're not doing that ideological nonsense anymore. And in fact, what do you get? Abortion was illegal through Europe. The Vatican is sitting right there, right? What happens in Italy? They toss out the anti-abortion laws. Out. We're not having this. Many of those European women have been raped by the Germans and the Russians and all the rest. We are walking away from this ideological nonsense. We need practicality, not this. But if you want, I mean, it's like the Mount Pelerin Society about the free market economy. This is intellectual. Think of words that Terry wouldn't say. I can only think of words that Terry would say, and I can't say them. This is intellectual gymnastics that is nonsense. And so, free market account. Yeah, we're going to talk, when we get to the end, we're going to hear about how Alan Greenspan thought we should not have laws against fraud. Think about that. We should let the free market regulate fraud. Fraud caused the collapse of 2008. The collapse of 2008 gave birth to Donald Trump. Make no mistake about it. This is playing with fire. Alan Greenspan, and then when it all blew up, what did Alan Greenspan say? There was a flaw in my model. There was a flaw, and you're gonna hear him be confronted at a congressional hearing, and Alan Greenspan have to say, "Yes, I was wrong." So it's a long answer to the question, Maxine, but it is important to see the difference. And the two books that I think capture them are Democracy in Chains and The Post-War by Tony Judd.
Thank you.
Hey, Dave?
Yeah, why would they be against abortion? Because more people working, cheaper labor.
Well, why would Europeans be against abortion?
No, Americans. The American capitalists, why would they be against abortion? Because the more workers in the workplace, the less they have to pay wages. If you get people pregnant, they can't be working, you don't make as much money. So why are they anti-abortion?
Well, again, if you look for logic, you have to open up to other interpretations of events. And so if I go back to when we had the slave economy, when Thomas Jefferson wanted to say that the international slave trade can end in 20 years, and that'll be a good thing because Virginia has an oversupply of slaves, and we're going to be the place that harvests slaves, and we're going to send them to these other places, to cotton fields and all that kind of stuff. So the idea that taking control over women's reproductive activity was vital for those who wanted to make a lot of money through slavery and rich, fertile Indian lands. And so the people of power want to make sure that they keep control over that kind of thing. And it also became a tool for a wedge issue with, what happens is the slave masters in putting together their organization, they start think tanks and all these kinds. And what they're doing is they're bringing together the best and the brightest. They say we have to do our stuff underground so people don't know what we're doing. So the best and the brightest go out and they look to see what kinds of things can we use as wedge issues. Abortion becomes one, because it wasn't one before, it became one. Guns was not an issue, it became one. All of this was fabricated by the best and the brightest under the employ of the slave master. We're going to talk about how they had great legal minds go to work for them so that they could look at things like, let's see, we could make an issue out of the Second Amendment. So you know what we're going to do? We are going to figure out the rules of the National Rifle Association. We are going to seize control over the National Rifle Association. And the National Rifle Association goes to its annual event to elect its officers, only they don't know that these legal minds have come up with a way to influence the election, to take control over the NRA and put in charge Butthead. That's his name, Butthead. That's the truth. And he was an immigration officer in Texas who had killed a man, was convicted. The legal minds got it overturned, and he now becomes the executive director of the National Rifle Organization and transforms it into a manufacturers association. And suddenly the Second Amendment is an issue. So all of these things, abortion, gun rights, taxation, all that nonsense, gay marriage, these are fabricated issues to drive wedges between Americans. They had to separate Americans from America. And they used the techniques of Bernays, which Terry will articulate next week, and they are very successful in doing it. Go ahead, Maxine.
What flaw is there in the American mind that allows this to happen? I mean, we clearly look at all of us. We're very intelligent people here.
Well, they're underground. Mind you, what they do is they go underground so that you don't know. If I want to know who is funding ALEC, the American Legislative Elections Council, whatever it is, this is the group that goes around to states and writes their legislation for them. Funds them. It's dark money. And who led that charge? One of their poster Supreme Court justices that they got onto the bench, the Chief Justice Roberts. So under the guise of free speech, we now have legalized bribery and corruption of the government.
Whoa.
Secret money.
But back up a little there. How did you go from dark money to Roberts so fast?
Well, because what happens is Roberts in the Heller decision says that campaign contributions are free speech.
Oh.
It opens the door to all kinds of money flooding in.
Oh, gosh. Got it. Shit. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, you must have been talking to Terry.
Hi, Terry.
Sad, I was Citizens United.
No, I'm sorry. So
Alita was screwed us on guns.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I get them confused.
Yeah, and then he screwed us on this and voting rights.
You get Scalia.
Yeah.
You know, that's
yeah.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, Roberts screwed up voting rights and he screwed up Citizens United.
Do we have any other questions or comments? If not.
Wait, Ralph, you got to have something.
Oh, wait, Joy's got something.
Okay, in my.
Hey, we'll let Joy go first and then I'll come.
Okay.
I knew you have to have something. Go ahead, Joy.
I do. In my eternal quest for reality, we've got all these influences. How do we combat this? Is this just a fait accompli and can never change?
I think look, the heart of my consulting was to say, you must understand the problem. What you think is the problem based on immediate stuff is not the problem. You need the research and the background. And so I think people need to understand that these, that the people that you see on TV, the Matt Gaetz, the election deniers, all these, they're not the problem. It's the people behind them who are the problem. And we've got to start looking at them because they're the people who are pulling the strings and are putting that money in there. And that's who you need to look at. One in particular, it just bought the New York Mets, right? Stephen A. Cohen. Stephen A. Cohen, guy who got rich out of, you know, on investments of knowing what was going on before the rest of the world did, and you know, being able insider trading, and when he got brought up on, when they were going to prosecute him, he said, "I have more lawyers than the Department of Justice. Are you willing to spend that much money to convict me? I'll agree to a settlement, a cash settlement." And that's what happened. So, you know, we need to understand the people who are behind this, because they are the real problem.
Yeah, but you're preaching to the choir here. How do you get that out to the general public in a way that they will understand and realize it's in their best interest to change things? Or, as I say, or is it a fait accompli that will never change them?
No, this is my answer. This is how I do it. I teach a class. I try to share. I try to explain, provide my evidence, whatever, and hope I can persuade people. That's the best I can do. I mean, I think that's it. I don't know the answer. I don't know how we get cut through, but it's a form. That is the source of our demise. Right now, I hope that they really come through and say, who paid for January 6th?
Who pays for Santos?
Right. I mean, there's going to be we need to see where that money came from.
One of my
it's
favorite.
going to be through 501(c) organizations. There, the money is hidden.
One of my favorite lines in a movie, James Stewart in Harvey. The line went this way: "I've wrestled with reality for 35 years, and I'm happy to say I've overcome it."
We've overcome it by age.
I love it.
Okay, Ralph.
Yeah, I appreciate a chance to say something, Sal, and I take your classes and I see a bigger and bigger picture. And one thing that strikes me this morning is how your overall thesis is just so far beyond ordinary politics, party A versus party B. I mean, anyone can see right now how it is that the Republicans are operating and who and what is animating them. It's so obvious. And you know, how can anyone help but massively prefer the Democrats, just in my opinion right now. However, the Democrats have certainly had their share of horrible views and actions over the years. And some of my conservative friends take great pleasure in pointing out to me all the horrible Democratic Party things and actions about Black people and Native Americans and everybody else back in the day. And it strikes me that those with power have essentially been able to commandeer both political parties here and parties in Europe as well, though it reminds me again how we would be better off with multiple parties. Perhaps some of this could not be gotten away with, like threatening the entire debt payment system of the United States, because we feel like extracting some things with no overall plan whatsoever. You know, it's if there's only two parties, you can infiltrate that other parties. And while it's the Republicans that are consumed with this right now, it may not always be so. And they seem utterly unable to consider how if it was the other side, they would be going nuclear. The hypocrisy is a million miles deep. And watching the speaker battle last week and how ridiculous that is, with junior backbenchers being given plum committee assignments, which they do not deserve by experience or demonstrated leadership. None of those people should be on any of those damn committees, and we all know it. But he sold it out that he was extorted, and that's what we have going on the other side. But it is beyond politics. It's those with, you know, we're not going to make things better for everyone. We're just not going to do it.
Well, here's
something's echoing.
Maybe it'll help for me to mute.
Okay, here's what I'd want to say, Ralph, is for two things. First is that the intense animosity to Bill Clinton is that Bill Clinton also started going to the slave masters and getting support from them.
Yes.
He became beholden. And we're going to see that later on in the class, that, you know, it's Clinton's people who are very much deep into this whole thing of where we are today. Secondly, is that what Republicans need to see this. There was the Republican Party. Then there was an invasion to take over the Republican Party and push the Republicans out. And here's what happens. Mind you, when George Wallace ran against Nixon and Humphrey, he ran on the racist platform. And what stunned a lot of people was how well he did. Hubert Humphrey would have won had it not been for George Wallace. Now, what they see that, but remember, George Wallace ran as an independent, and he took a sizable share of the vote. So the slave masters looked at that, and they thought, we could, you know, this is our avenue. You know, we need to really expand on this racial fight. Now, mind you, they propose creating a third party, an independent party, and what they want to do is run Reagan as president and George Wallace as vice president. Now that didn't work, okay? It didn't gel. But then what they decided, they were deep into the Democratic Party through the 1940s and 1950s. When LBJ betrayed them and passes legislation to free Black people, they morph over to the Republican Party. They think of an independent party as a way to do it, but they then say, we can take over the Republican Party. And they're very skilled in understanding the rules of the party, direct mail campaigns. Remember, they hired the best and the brightest. So how can we get in there and seize control? Just like we seize control over the NRA, how can we seize control over the GOP? That, and Republicans, and that they are blind to what happened to them. If you have to take Gerald Ford and put him up there against McCarthy. These are not the same people. The Republican Party, you know, if you were going to do well in Republican politics, you had to have served in World War II. Who in Republican politics today has served in any of the recent wars or in the military during those wars? None of them. So it's the contrary. They need to see that their party has been overrun, and they don't. I think they've got to see that. So the force that I'm talking about is not the Republican Party, because the Republican Party doesn't exist. These are so-called conservatives. They've taken the word conservative to represent revolution, this anti-democracy. That's what they are for. And we need to see that. Well, I think I've overstayed my welcome.
Yeah, that's okay. We're going to ask everyone to unmute and give Sal a round of applause. And,
thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank
you, Sal. Thanks, Sal.
Good job.
Thank you.
Do you want to give 2
Sal.
seconds?
Thank you,
on
Sal.
what's
Adam
next week?
Kinzinger. Happy New Year, everybody.
Served.
Yes, that's right. And run off.
Do you want to
Right,
give?
got to get rid of him.
Do you want to give 2 seconds on what's coming up next week?
Terry's coming up next week. She's going to talk about Bernays and social psychology and how we get manipulated and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.